Okay, everybody, good morning. So I'm Leslie Shepard. I'm your labor representative, and I've been working with your bargaining team since the beginning of December to work to negotiate your next contract. So what we have today is a presentation of the agreements that were made during negotiations. It's a pretty long document, which everyone should have gotten emailed to them. So if you haven't, please let me know once we're through this, and we'll make sure you get a copy. But I'm going to highlight some of the big changes and the economic changes and go through about 15 different items. And there's definitely a lot more in here, so make sure you review it. Just a note, the vote will happen next week on Monday and Tuesday. We'll have flyers and everything posted by the end of the day today. Voting times are going to be at both shift changes in the morning, 6:30 to 8:30 a.m. and 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. and then through lunch, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. on both Monday and Tuesday of next week. More information on that will come out over the course of today. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first piece that I have highlighted here is a ratification bonus. So this is instead of back pay, full and part-time nurses employed in a bargaining unit position as of March 1st, 2020 will receive a ratification bonus of $225, prorated by FTE, effective the first pay period following ratification. For whatever reason, and I'm not sure how it went down last time, but the employer was not in any way interested in back pay and in fact kept saying no, no, no when we would bring it up. And finally, on the last day, the idea of a ratification bonus came from them. So that's where that came from. The next piece is workplace violence. So we work to get some language in here for you guys. What this really focuses on is the immediate care of a nurse post-incident. So this is for a nurse who either experiences or witnesses an act of workplace violence. It allows for immediate debriefing to occur with the nurse to see, like, can you continue your shift? Do you need any medical attention? Do you need to switch assignments? Do you just need to break? What do you need as the nurse who've experienced this to deal with the rest of your shift or what have you? And then after that, as quickly as possible, your manager is supposed to meet with you to kind of present what resources are available through St. Patrick's Hospital to help you recover from whatever has happened. If you need counseling, there's counseling through the caregiver assistance plan. And this language allows for you, at least for the first 2 sessions within the first 2 weeks after the incident, to attend counseling sessions of up to 4 hours without any loss of paid time. So if you have to schedule them during your normally scheduled shifts or your normal work time, you get that time off. And it's paid, so that's kind of nice. We've also added some no retaliation language to the end of this. So for any nurse who has experienced violence, violent conduct, participates in investigation, reports it, there's protection to prevent retaliation in here. So we'll just keep going down. So the next piece is seniority requests off. So this is for PTO. The language in section 8.29 currently is really specific about using seniority requests during prime time vacations. What we've done through negotiations is opened that availability to request using your seniority for vacation for any time throughout the year, once a year. So that really helps for people who need to secure time off for a wedding, time off for hunting, whatever they want. It opens up that ability to use your seniority to secure vacation. The next section that we're going to talk about is in Article 12 under insurance programs, and it's about short-term disability. So this is a pretty big piece here. So starting July 5th of 2020, any new leaves with a date of disability on or after that date, short-term disability will be paid at 100% for the first 8 weeks following the 7-day waiting period. So that's fantastic. You wouldn't have to use any of your PTO to get 100% for the first 8 weeks. Now, if you have a short-term disability that extends past that 9th week, first week is your waiting period, 8 weeks of 100% pay. That 10th week then would be paid at 66 2/3%, and you have the ability to top up with PTO after that. So that's what this language in letter D says. So it's a huge benefit. 12.x, we'll figure out where that goes in Article 12, talks about paid parental leave. And there was some confusion initially on this. Just to clarify, when you have a baby, when you give birth, you have a medical reason to recover and have short-term disability for medical reasons. This paid parental leave is in addition to that maternity childbirth recovery period. So just so y'all understand that. So this is some great benefits too. So let's move down a little bit further here. So just cause is the next piece of this. We have added the term just cause into your discipline section in Article 18. Just cause is really implied with progressive discipline, but there's some discussion at the table that made us want to include this into the contract. So this is here, and it's a nice benefit, and it just makes what's implied very black and white. We did some grievance procedure updates, nothing of real substance. We've just clarified what business and working days are, and making sure that that's consistent throughout the article. We've updated the chief nursing officer title. So nothing of great substance here, just really clarifying some things, defining business days, things of that nature. And that follows through the arbitration section as well. Professional development. So this is actually kind of exciting. So in Article 22.11, y'all have the ability to utilize 8 hours of pay for non-mandatory education. We've increased that education hour from 8 to 24, which is a giant increase at your base rate of pay. This will go a long way to maintaining certifications, as well as keeping up with the requirements of being a magnet facility, and so we got that, which is great. Leaves of absence, Article 23 is the next section. So this is bereavement leave. Currently, you guys have in your contract what is called Me Too language in terms of bereavement leave, and what that means is, excuse me, what that means is that you get whatever the rest of the hospital gets. So if whatever the rest of the hospital gets changes for better or worse, yours changes for better or worse as well. What we've done is actually put the content of the bereavement policy within the contract to protect it. And what that means is if the policy changes for worse, yours doesn't. Yours is protected. So in addition to that positive piece of it, we've also got a bit of an expanded benefit here. So currently, for the loss of an immediate family member, nurses may receive up to 24 hours. We've added per death in here. So if you have multiple within the same week or within the same month, you get up to 24 hours for any of those. And then for nurses who experience a close family member death, a significant other, a spouse, a child, you can have up to 40 hours. So they've expanded that and increased the amount so you can get a whole week paid off if necessary. We've defined what immediate family member is in here, and we've added some language which talks about minimums. It's this last paragraph down here, and it basically says that if the hospital increases this benefit and maybe gives everybody 36 per death or 80 or what have you, that there is the ability to increase what is in the contract as well. But if they take things away from the other employees and say, oh, we're only going to do 12 hours of paid time for bereavement, they can't take what is outlined in the contract. So it's just more protections for this language. Moving on to differentials and premium pays. So we'll just walk through all of these. So this first section, evening shift, night shift, weekend shift, you'll notice there's some time changes in here from 10 p.m. to 11 p.m. to reflect current timekeeping practices. In addition to that, we've gotten a 25-cent increase for evening shift, a 50-cent increase for night shift, and then a 25-cent increase for weekend shift. So evenings at $2, night shift at $4.25, and weekend at $2. Moving down to charge nurse, we've got a 50-cent increase on that for $2.50. And then we've also captured some language here that protects that charge nurse differential if a charge nurse is required to float outside of the role as charge as required or requested by the hospital. So that differential would follow that nurse for the rest of the shift, and they'd get paid it for the duration of the hours worked. Resource pool differential, that increased 50 cents. Stat nurse differential increased to $4.50. Certification differential, while we didn't increase the dollar amount here, you guys actually have a pretty high certification per hour pay. We did put some language in here to expand this differential just a bit. So currently, if you transfer into a new department and your certification isn't specific to that department, it follows you until you're able to take the test for that department. That only applied to transfers. We've expanded it to apply for new hires as well. Let's see. Oh, this is still certification. Forgive me. So extra shift premium pay, the dollar amount, $6 for extra shift is still the same, but what we've done is the changes here on the hours piece of it. Some departments were utilizing a 2-hour minimum while others were utilizing a 4-hour minimum for the extra shift premium pay. So what we've done is tried to make that consistent, and we've gone with the 2 hours, so a smaller requirement. Under holiday pay, we've added some language here for departments that close on the holidays, that nurses are not going to be required to use their PTO if the unit is closed for a holiday, and that those unpaid days don't count towards the nurse's total of unpaid days in a year. Moving into call, so on-call pay we've increased by 25 cents, and on-call extra we've increased by 25 cents, so $4.25 and $5.75 respectively. We have some language in this section as well that talks about mandatory call, and specifically if a nurse vacates their role in a call department and their call shifts are then open, mandatory call or the first 4 weeks after after the nurse leaves, the first 4 weeks of those shifts that need to be filled in, nurses were getting paid at the on-call extra rate. We've increased that time frame to be the first 4 weeks. I'm sorry, the first 6 weeks. So we've added an additional 2 weeks onto that. We've also added some language for nurses who work call and then have less than 8 hours off between the end of their call shift and the beginning of their next scheduled shift. Currently, those nurses get time and a half for the hours that they work on that scheduled shift. The language we've added allows them to have the first option to go home if a low census day is required. And we've put in here that it would be the nurse's responsibility to identify that A, they want to be on the low census list, and B, that they've had less than 8 hours off, so they get priority. We've also asked for nurses to not have to utilize PTO for any excused hours when they need rest. So that's this language down here. So wage matrix, this is kind of the meat of the economic piece of this. So note at the top here that it's effective the first full pay period following ratification. It's not effective on the first part of March. So note that. We've negotiated a 4-year contract here with the 20-step scale. There's still an average of 2% between every step. And year 1 is a 3% increase. Year 2 is a 3% increase. Year 3 is 2.75, and year 4 is 3%. Keep going through here. So off the scale nurses get 4% each year for the next 4 years. The cap is still at $52 an hour. The nurses then will receive any dollar difference above the cap based on their FTE paid in a lump sum. under the same section of the contract was the 1% metric bonus. We heard from a ton of nurses that this was just a big dissatisfier. So we bargained the metric bonus out to increase the base wages. Under professional rights, we have some very new language, which is for staffing. So this language brings the nurses' voice to the table when talking about planned changes in staffing. So in core staffing, like changing your matrix or changing the number of nurses you have on your department. This is really a foot in the door kind of language. It's not perfect, it's not a ratio, it's not strict guidelines, but it is allowing the nurses to be present and a part of the discussion. Any of these changes are supposed to be brought to Nurse Advisory Council with this language, and that Nurse Advisory Council get notified of plan changes at least 30 days in advance of the proposed changes. And we've also added language in here that at least 50% of at least 50% of Nurse Advisory Council is made up of direct care registered nurses, so bedside nurses doing the work, which we feel is very, very important. Also that both parties, the nurses and management, will make their best effort to ensure that there's equitable representation of all the departments on Nurse Advisory Council, which we also feel was very important. 27.11, this is language specific to the CIU. We've added language to protect what has been a practice, which is a $6 an hour premium pay for any hours that they were activated, and I think any hours that they were training, they were getting that as well. So we have protected that $6 an hour premium pay for those nurses. Moving down into low census, so we have adjusted low census notification times to be, excuse me, the same amount of time for notification for all shifts. We've also put in here a graduated system for mandatory low census. So for any nurse working less than a 0.75 FTE, they will not be assigned more than 8 hours of mandatory low census. Current contract language is everyone can have up to 12 per month. Now it's for those nurses working less, no more than 8 hours per month. This came forward because there were departments that were getting MLC every month, and those nurses working less than a 0.75 don't make up enough PTO to cover the low census that they were being assigned. So trying to just equalize that out a little bit. And then 28.6, we've added that there's not to be any mandatory low census assigned on holidays, as holidays defined in section 24.13. Moving through Schedule A is the policy for PDRs. So there's a lot of changes in this section. PDRs must fulfill at least 50% of the required and needed amount of hours or shifts on their home unit before signing up for shifts on the other unit. This is really to ensure that the departments that hire the PDR get those shifts filled first. And then if there's not enough shifts within their home unit, then they have the ability to go and outsource to a different department to fulfill their hour requirements. So that flexibility is still there. This also gives management the ability to post a shift-specific PDR position. So PDR is just for night shift. Effective July 5th, 2020, PDR nurses working between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. will receive $4.25 per hour PDR premium pay for all direct patient care hours worked. We worked very hard and tried for days and days and days to try and get an increase in PDR differential across the board. The only thing the hospital was willing to agree to was this 25 cents for PDR nurses who work night shifts or who are working night. But we did really try. The other thing that has changed here is the ability for a PDR nurse to move into a casual role. So the language is kind of scattered throughout here. It's down under PDR requirement. The option for casual PDR is going to go away. but the nurses who are currently casual PDRs will be grandfathered into this. So we're not getting rid of any of those positions in any way. Now, if those nurses leave employment or accept a bidded position, then that casual PDR role will go away. But until those nurses leave employment or change their FTE status, they'll stay casual and their requirements will stay the same. But the option for current PDR nurses, regular PDR, to move to casual will go away. One other change for hours is that shifts scheduled to start and end between 7 a.m. and 7:30 p.m. are not counted toward 25% evening or night requirement. So that means that for a day shift, the 3 to 7:30 hours, 3 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. hours are not going to count to that 25% minimum of the evenings and nights. So scrolling through, this last bit here is just a reflection of that grandfathering language to keep those casual PDR nurses that we currently have, or that you currently have. This next piece here is Schedule B, and it's specific language for Family Maternity Center, FMC, specific to how they do low census, call, and we added some language at the bottom for NICU staffing to help put in some protections for those NICU nurses. And those are the big highlighted, big changes, things that we wanted to present to you all. There's definitely some more things in this summary of agreement, so I really encourage you all to read it and go through it. If you have questions as you're reading and going through it on your own, reach out to your bargaining team, reach out to me, and we'll do our best to answer everybody's questions. So with that, I'm going to open this up for questions that anybody has. You guys are all muted, so you'll have to unmute if you have questions. I'm just going to go through some of the questions that some of the other nurses had, and if you feel like you need to hop off, we're almost at 8:30, so we understand if anybody has to leave. There was a question in one of the first presentations about PTO accruals and if any of that changed. We worked, and Karina, you can speak to this too, she's on our bargaining team. We worked very hard to try and increase PTO accruals, increase how they were accrued on all hours worked versus just your FTE, up to 40 hours. We tried to be really creative in coming at it in many different ways, but in no way was your employer open to those changes at all. My thought behind that is because if they changed it for the nurses, then they would have to change it for the rest of the staff, and the expense of that would be global. So I think, and Karina, correct me if I'm wrong here, but my memory is that, and not instead of the PTO accruals, but just to try and soften that, that's where they came forward with the short-term disability increases. Those were kind of talked about together. So another question that has come up, and y'all interrupt me if you have questions, please. Another question that has come up is why we didn't increase the cap for nurses, or why there isn't an increase in cap. As you all can probably understand, this is very much a negotiation. It's a give and take. We tried repeatedly up until the very end to increase the cap so that no one would cap out. Again, the employer was not interested in increasing that cap at all. $52 an hour is the highest cap in the state. It's definitely the highest in the MNA contracts that we know of. But the one caveat to those nurses being capped, even though they reach $52 an hour, it's just a cap on their hourly wage. They're still receiving the negotiated increases. It just comes as a lump sum. So do know that they're not just stuck at 52. They are still getting compensated with the other increases. Another concern that has come up is about the low census notification times and how that affects the charge nurses on the departments. It, for some departments, for some shifts, decreases the amount of time that the charge nurse has to talk with whoever needs to call the nurses for low census, or to make the calls themselves if that's the case. our goal with that was really to be consistent among all the shifts, because some shifts were having that same lessened time and others were getting more time. So the goal was really just to have some consistency with that. There's questions about pay for negotiators. What happened there? What happened is we filed an unfair labor practice, and the National Labor Relations Board found that unfair labor practice without merit. So we lost it. We continued to push for pay for negotiators, and the employer continued to not have any interest in that. So instead of having negotiations or pay for negotiators within the contract, we've agreed to, or your bargaining team agreed to, a letter of agreement that will reside outside of the contract, that when the next set of negotiation comes around, that we will all meet to discuss the topic of pay for negotiations. Does that mean they're going to pay the next set? I would assume probably not, but we won't know what that looks like until that time. Let's see. Another question that came up was regarding disability, short-term disability, and who decides what is considered a short-term disability and what isn't. That still resides with Sedgwick. There's still, that connection. Sedgwick is still the third-party company that's running the short-term disability. We don't have the ability in contract negotiations to make them change that, because that's a separate contract. We don't have a contract with Sedgwick. As far as I'm aware, I've had maybe 1 or 2 nurses come forward with issues with short-term disability in the last year or even longer, and we've been able to work through those. So if you guys are hearing of people having issues, make sure they bring them forward to HR, to me, and we can try and work through those. But as far as we know, people haven't been having the big issues that they were initially. Okay, I think that's most of the questions that have been asked. I'm going to just unmute everybody just to see if you guys have questions, but for whatever reason aren't able to unmute. So now you're all unmuted. Does anybody have any other questions? Doesn't sound like it. All right, well, thanks you guys so much for hopping on. If you have questions that you think about later, don't hesitate to reach out to one of us, and I hope you all have a great day.